The moment Lydia Bennet stepped off the train, the cold sliced through her dress like broken glass. The wind shoved against her spine, as if it too wanted her gone. Snow crunched underfoot as she staggered to keep her footing on the wooden platform. Around her, the people of Willow Creek leaned in, not with welcome, but curiosity sharpened like a blade. "There she is," a man muttered. "The bride." Lydia didn't look up. Her knuckles whitened around the leather strap of her satchel. She scanned the crowd, searching for the face from the letters. Broad shoulders, dark hair, a hint of something gentlemanly in his script. Then she saw him. Charles Morton pushed through the onlookers in a tailored wool coat that belonged in a city, not this raw, edged outpost. He was clean-shaven, sharp-eyed, handsome in a cold, deliberate way. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. "You're Miss Bennet?" he asked. She nodded. "Let's hear it then," he said, loud enough for the others to catch every word. "You wrote such lovely things. Say something. Just say hello." Her hand shook as she reached into her satchel and pulled out the slate and chalk she carried for moments like this. But before she could write, her throat seized. The sound was dry, brittle, barely more than the hiss of wind through pine. Charles's smile vanished. His expression turned hard. "What is this?" Lydia forced the words again, but they collapsed in her mouth like wet ash. She scribbled quickly. "My voice was damaged by fever. I told you in my letters I can only whisper." He snatched the slate, read, and scoffed. "You said quiet, not useless." Lydia's spine stiffened. Her breath came in tight, shallow gasps. "This is fraud," Charles said loudly, turning to the crowd. "She tricked me. I asked for a wife, not a ghost." The people murmured. Someone chuckled. Someone else looked away. "She can't teach children, can't run a household, can't even yell if the house is on fire." He sneered. "She's defective." The word cracked across the platform like a whip. Charles pulled a wad of bills from his coat and tossed it at her feet. "Here. For your trouble, go back to wherever you came from." The money scattered in the wind, some bills catching in the melting slush. Lydia stood frozen. Behind her, the train hissed as it released its steam. Already preparing to leave, someone cleared their throat. A woman's voice, quiet but firm. "That's enough, Charles." Lydia turned slowly. A woman in a wool shawl stepped forward. She had gray, streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much and learned not to flinch. "Martha Calloway," she said, meeting Lydia's eyes. "I run the boarding house on 2nd. Come with me." Lydia bent down, picked up the money with trembling fingers. She didn't cry. Not yet. Not until they reached the end of the platform and Martha opened her front door, letting warmth spill across the threshold like mercy. It wasn't until the door shut behind her, muffling the wind, that the tears finally came, and even then her sobs made no sound. The boarding house smelled of stew, tobacco, and old wood. Upstairs, Martha led her to a narrow room with a narrow bed. "Sit," she said. "You'll be safe here for now." Lydia nodded. Martha studied her. "You hungry?" Lydia shook her head. "You will be," Martha said. "This town, it chews women like you and spits out the bones, but you lasted 6 days on a train alone. That says something." Lydia wrote on her slate. "Thank you for helping me." Martha's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "Don't thank me yet." Downstairs, voices murmured, boarders returning, asking questions. One used Lydia's name. Another said, "Did she really come all the way from Philadelphia?" And another, "What's she gonna do now? Can't even talk?" The words hit like pebbles through glass. Lydia stared at her reflection in the window. A pale face, red nose, eyes that refused to dim no matter how many times they were told to be smaller. What really hurt wasn't Charles's rejection. It was how easily everyone else agreed with him. She looked at the crumpled bills on the table. Enough for a ticket east, barely. But going back meant explaining. It meant facing the voice from her past, the one that always whispered you were never enough. She pressed her hand against her throat. It had never healed. Not truly. The fever took her voice, but it didn't take her mind. She remembered the doctor's words to her mother. Some scars can't be seen. She remembered something else, too. A letter, burned edges, held close in secret, not Charles's, different handwriting. She blinked, shoved it away later. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. Someone was climbing the stairs. Martha didn't knock. "There's a woman in town," she said through the half-open door. "Owns a dress shop, Emma Hartley. She needs help. She don't care if you talk or not, only if your stitches are straight." Lydia sat up. "I'll take you tomorrow morning," Martha said. "You can show her what you can do." Then she hesitated. "If you still want to stay." Lydia looked at the money, then the door, then her hands, small, chapped, still shaking. She erased the chalkboard and wrote, "Yes, I want to try." Martha nodded once. "Good." The door clicked shut. Outside, snow began falling again, soft, silent, and thick. It coated the muddy footprints Charles had left behind. But even as the wind erased the evidence, Lydia knew this wasn't over. Charles wasn't the only one watching, and someone had followed the train in too. Someone she hadn't seen, but she'd felt it. Eyes from the shadows, waiting, listening. She didn't cry until the door closed behind her, and even then, the sobs made no sound. The morning began before the sun reached the mountains. Lydia stood by the wash basin in Martha Calloway's boarding house, scrubbing her face with cold water, jaw clenched to stop her teeth from chattering. Her boots were still damp from yesterday's snow, but she laced them tight. She had not slept. Her body rested, but her mind roamed backward. Every time she shut her eyes, she saw Charles Morton's face contort with disdain downstairs. The smell of coffee and fried cornmeal filled the house. She descended quietly, carrying her satchel-like armor. Martha was already at the stove, flipping biscuits in a cast-iron pan, her back straight and movements sharp. "You'll want to eat something," she said, not looking up. Emma's particular about her help not fainting in her shop. Lydia sat and forced herself to eat 2 bites. Her stomach rebelled, but she swallowed them anyway. Martha finally turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "She doesn't care about your voice," she said, tone flat. "She cares about your work. If it's good, you'll stay. If it's not, you'll know quick." Lydia nodded. That was fair. Honest. No promises made on false assumptions. The town was quiet as they walked. Snow crunched beneath their boots, and chimneys sent up thin lines of smoke into a pale sky. Lydia pulled her coat tighter. Martha didn't speak much, but Lydia didn't need words. The woman's steady presence was enough, a rare kindness in a place that had already marked her as other. Emma Hartley's shop sat on the corner of Main and Willow. Its windows steamed from inside. Martha opened the door, and the scent of lavender and muslin washed over them. Bolts of fabric lined the shelves, stacked like firewood. Dresses in various stages of completion hung from hooks. Emma stood behind the counter, tall and thin, with hawk-like eyes and a needle pinned to her collar. She wore no smile, but neither did she scowl. "You brought her?" she said. Martha nodded. "She can work. Show her something." Emma pulled a torn piece of silk from behind the counter and handed it over without ceremony. Lydia ran her fingers across the frayed edge. Silk, a brutal test. It revealed every flaw. Emma pointed to a stool near the back. "Needles are there. Thread too." "Show me." Lydia set her satchel down and got to work. Her fingers moved without thought. Trained by years behind a Philadelphia dressmaker's bench, she found matching thread, fine enough not to pucker, and threaded the needle with a steady hand. The first stitch was always the hardest. After that, muscle memory took over. The world narrowed to the fabric beneath her hands. When she finished, she stood and held the repair to the light. Emma took it, examined the seam, and nodded once. "You'll do," she said. That was it. No praise, no softness. But Lydia felt warmth rise in her chest. It wasn't approval she needed. It was permission to stay, to exist. "I pay $3 a week," Emma said. "Commission on any custom work. Hours are 7 to 6, 1 hour for lunch, Monday through Saturday." Lydia picked up her slate. "Yes. Thank you." Emma barely glanced at it. "Put your things over there. No need to keep writing unless you have to." That first day, Lydia stayed quiet and low to the ground. She kept to the back, organizing fabric, mending small tears, watching how Emma moved through the shop, fast, efficient, sharp. There were no flourishes in the way Emma pinned a hem, but her garments fit like second skin. Customers came and went. Some cast glances at Lydia, whispers like the ones at the station trailing behind them. "Is that her?" "That's the one Morton sent back." Lydia said nothing. She kept sewing. By afternoon, her shoulders ached. She took her lunch in the alley behind the shop. Watching the snow melt into the dirt road, her slate rested on her lap. She traced invisible letters on it with her finger, not writing anything, just keeping her hands moving. Inside, Emma worked in silence. It suited Lydia. She didn't miss the noise of other places, the chatter, the judgments dressed up as small talk. Here, silence had weight, but not shame. By the end of the week, Emma started leaving her alone with more complicated commissions. One afternoon, she handed Lydia a bolt of deep blue wool and pointed to a sketch. "Mrs. Holloway wants this by Tuesday. She's 5'4", round shoulders, thick wrists. Do your best." Lydia worked late. She stayed after closing, pinning and cutting. The quiet felt less heavy now, more like solitude than exile. One evening, Emma brought her a cup of tea without speaking and watched her baste a sleeve. "She didn't ask about your voice," she said suddenly. "Neither did I. It's none of our business." Lydia looked up, startled. Emma's eyes didn't waver. "But the work? That's everyone's business. You get that, you'll be fine." Lydia nodded, chest tight. She picked up her slate, hesitated, then simply wrote "thank you." The next day, the whispers grew louder again. A customer lingered by the counter too long, not asking about fabric, but about Lydia. "She lives at Martha's, doesn't she?" the woman said. "Came all the way from the east." Emma said nothing. "I heard she was mute, can't even yell for help if she's being robbed." "She can sue better than you can gossip," Emma replied flatly, not looking up. The woman left in a huff. Lydia heard it all from the back. Her hands didn't stop moving. They could whisper all they wanted. Her hands were louder than any voice. That night, Lydia passed the train station on her walk home. She stood where she had first arrived, boots sinking into the slush, the same bench, the same knot in her stomach. But something inside her had shifted. She was still alone, but not adrift. She pressed her fingers to her throat. It still ached sometimes, as if the words inside her had claws. From the shadows near the freight house, she heard a sound. Soft, irregular, not footsteps, not wind. She turned. Nothing there, but the feeling stayed. Not danger, not yet, but something was watching, someone. She didn't sleep well that night, and the next morning, when the bell above the shop door rang and a man stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, with wind-blown hair and a shirt torn clean across the shoulder. Lydia's heart jumped before she even turned to look. She would remember later how he didn't speak first, how he moved quietly, like someone used to being misunderstood, and how, when he saw her slate and chalk on the counter, his eyes lit up, not with pity, but recognition. The shop bell jingled once, sharp and clean against the hush of late morning. Lydia looked up from her stitching just in time to see the man duck through the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders and melting fast on the wood floor. He didn't stomp or speak, just stood there, a little too still, a little too quiet. Holding a torn flannel shirt in his right hand, Emma glanced up from her measuring table. "Need a repair?" The man nodded. He had a straight jawline, tanned from sun and work, and eyes the color of dry riverbed clay. His coat was worn, the cuffs frayed, and the buttons mismatched. Repaired by someone who cared more for function than form. Emma reached for the shirt, but the man shook his head once and stepped forward, laying it gently on the counter. Then he pointed to the tear and tapped his chest. Emma narrowed her eyes. "You want it mended same day?" The man pointed again to his chest, then made a motion. 2 fingers extended, drawing a line from his mouth to his chin. Lydia's heart skipped. That sign. She'd seen it once before, years ago, in the alley behind a Quaker meeting house, where a mute child spelled his name in the air. Emma frowned. "I don't understand. You don't speak." The man shook his head. Lydia rose slowly, slate in hand. She walked forward and held it where he could see. Her chalk scratched across the surface. "Are you deaf?" The man's eyes flicked to her face. He didn't smile, but something in him relaxed, like a knot coming undone. He responded not with speech, but with his hands, fingers forming letters. Slow, deliberate yes. Lydia watched closely, reading each movement. She responded in kind. Awkward, hesitant Lydia. Emma looked between them, eyebrows raised. "You two understand each other." Lydia nodded, then added to the slate. "I'm still learning." Elias signed again. "You sign well, better than most." She smiled for the first time in days. Emma tapped the torn shirt. "Can she fix it?" Elias looked at Lydia. She answered by gently picking up the shirt, running her fingers along the rip. She chalked 1 hour. Elias gave a short nod, then stepped aside and took a seat by the window, as if he had nowhere else to be. He watched the street, the snow, the people passing by who didn't look twice at him. Lydia returned to the back and threaded her needle. Her hands moved on instinct, but her thoughts wouldn't still. A deaf man in Willow Creek, and one who knew how to sign. Clearly, carefully. Not just a few hand motions or desperate guesses. She glanced up more than once while she worked. Elias didn't fidget, didn't make noise. He sat like he was carved from wood. But his eyes missed nothing. 1 hour later, she returned with the repaired shirt, pressed and folded. She laid it on the counter and waited. Elias unfolded it, examined the seam, then looked up at her. He gave a small, respectful nod. Then he signed, "You're good with your hands." She answered you too, with language, a flicker, barely visible, creased the corner of his mouth. He reached into his coat, pulled out a few coins, and handed them to Emma. Then, as he turned to leave, he paused, his fingers moved again. You want to learn more signs? Lydia hesitated. Her heart thudded harder than it should have. She nodded. Yes. He pointed to the shop floor. I'll return next Friday. And then he left. When the door shut behind him, Emma let out a breath. Well, she said, you don't see that every day. Lydia returned to her seat, head down, hands trembling slightly. She didn't know what to call it. Relief maybe, or the first crack of light through a boarded window. She didn't want to hope, but she did. Elias returned the next Friday, just as he'd said. This time, he brought another shirt. 2 buttons missing, a pocket loose, but he didn't hand it to Emma. He gave it straight to Lydia. She set it aside and waited. He began slowly, teaching her the alphabet in motion, A through G, H through N. His fingers steady, his patience endless. Lydia mirrored him, sometimes fumbling when she got it wrong. He shook his head gently, then repeated the motion until she had it. By the 3rd lesson, she could spell both their names in full. He taught her signs for color, fabric, needle, thread, and then one day, he paused mid-lesson and pointed at her chest, not rudely, not accusingly, just a quiet gesture. Then he signed 2 words, quiet, strong. She blinked. He signed again. This is your name, in sign. She didn't know what to do with that, a name, not from birth, not from a man in authority, but from someone who had seen her silence not as absence, but as power. When his hands named her, she felt more known than any spoken word had ever made her feel. Emma noticed, of course, but she said nothing, just watched from the corner of her eye and started giving Lydia more work that kept her near the counter on Fridays. The townsfolk noticed too, whispers again. But this time, Lydia didn't hear them. She only watched the way Elias's fingers danced when he spoke. One evening, as she was closing the shop, Lydia passed the small mirror Emma kept by the door for customers to check their collars and hems. She caught her reflection. For a second, she didn't recognize herself. Her face was the same, but her shoulders sat straighter, her hands were steadier. The bruise Charles left on her pride had faded. Not vanished, but dulled to a memory. She wasn't healed. But she wasn't hollow anymore either. Still, shadows lingered. She thought again of that night by the train station. That sound behind the freight house, that sense of being watched. It hadn't happened again. But the feeling hadn't left either, and she hadn't told anyone. Because some fears, like scars, didn't show on the surface. On the 4th Friday, Elias arrived late, his sleeve damp, a faint red mark on his knuckle. Lydia signed a question. Hurt? He waved it off. Fence broke. Fixed it. She hesitated, then signed need help. He smiled. A real one this time, small, quiet, but undeniably real, maybe. Before he left, he pulled a pencil stub and scrap paper from his coat and wrote something down. It was an address. A ranch, not far outside town. Come visit, he signed. Then he paused. Only if you want. Lydia stared at the paper long after he left. Emma looked up from her sewing. Well, she said not unkindly. Looks like you're invited. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, persistent, just enough to blur the road, but not erase it. The ranch road twisted like a scar through the foothills, rising and falling with the land. Lydia gripped the edges of the wagon bench as it creaked over a patch of frozen mud, her breath fogging in the morning air. Emma had lent her the cart and horse for the day, reluctantly but without questions. You'll be back by dusk, Emma had said flatly, handing her the reins. No excuses, and no foolishness. Lydia had nodded. She hadn't dared to smile now. The horse's ears twitched with every gust of wind, and the wheels clattered against gravel. The sky above the pines was hard blue, cloudless and cruel in its coldness. She tightened the scarf under her chin. The paper with Elias's address tucked safely in her coat pocket, though she no longer needed it. The path was marked not by signs, but by memory. The way his fingers had spelled it out slowly for her, as if giving her directions through something deeper than land. She spotted the gate first, rough-hewn and wide, set between 2 crooked posts. The fence line ran into the trees on either side, hand-built, worn, honest. She pulled the horse to a stop, climbed down, and pushed the gate open. The ranch opened up before her in quiet, vast stretches. A barn leaned slightly with age, but held firm. A corral sat empty, dusted with snow. The house was simple. Timber walls, low roof, smoke curling from the chimney, and in the yard, chopping firewood with his back turned, stood Elias. She didn't call out. She didn't need to. He paused, turned, and saw her. He wiped his hands on a cloth tucked into his belt, then walked toward her with an ease that didn't show on most men. No rush, no fear, just a quiet certainty. When he reached her, he signed you came. She smiled and answered you asked. He led her inside. The house was warm in a way that came from effort. Thick logs stacked near the hearth, boots lined against the wall, tools placed where they were meant to be. A table sat in the center, a kettle whistling softly on the stove. Elias poured tea and handed her a cup without asking how she took it. She wrapped her fingers around the metal, letting the heat sink into her bones. He pointed to the far wall. A drawing hung there framed in simple pine, charcoal, clean lines. Lydia stepped closer. It was her. Not precisely, not a mirror, but a memory caught on paper, her profile soft and still. A wisp of hair had come loose and curled near her jaw, her eyes slightly downcast. Not sad, just quiet. She turned, slate in hand. When Elias signed the first day at the shop, she didn't know what to say. He signed again. You looked like you belonged even then. He motioned toward a trunk near the window. Inside were more sketches. The coral, a hawk perched on the roof, Emma's storefront in late dusk, and Lydia again, hands mid-seam, chalkboard on her lap, head bent in concentration. No one had ever looked at her long enough to remember her this way, let alone draw her. Her fingers moved before she could stop them. You see people differently, Elias replied. I have to. I don't hear lies. I see them. She stilled, then signed. Have you seen any in me? His hands paused in the air. Then no. But I think you have. Lydia looked away. That old cracked shame pulled at her again. The sound of Charles's voice in her head, the money at her feet, the way the townsfolk had turned away without blinking. Elias stepped closer. Not touching, just near enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. He signed. I don't ask for truth with words, just time. She nodded. They moved outside after lunch. Elias showed her the barn, the saddle hooks lined up with military precision, the trove frozen at the edges, the fields beyond the ridge. It was not a large property, but it was cared for, lived in, and everything here, like him, was built to last. He pointed to the ridge. In spring, elk come down. The calves are loud. You'd hate it. She laughed, a whispery puff of breath, then picked up her slate. Maybe. But you'd hate Philadelphia. The noise never stops. He signed. Maybe. But the bread's better there. They spent the rest of the afternoon in quiet movement, fixing a hinge on the barn door, sweeping out the tack room. She watched how his hands worked without hesitation, every nail he drove in, every knot he tied. It was all fluent, unthinking, a language of action. He caught her watching once and signed. Same hands that draw, same hands that fix fences. She replied, same hands that gave me a name. He paused, then nodded once. By late afternoon, the sky bruised purple, snow began again, light but insistent. They stood on the porch, the ranch behind them, the wind pressing at their coats. Elias pulled something from his pocket, a small pouch. Inside was a pair of gloves, stitched from soft leather, worn at the knuckles. He handed them to her. She held them up. Yours? He shook his head. Then signed. They were my mother's. She couldn't speak either. The weight of it dropped into her hands like stone. She wrote slowly. Did she teach you to sign? He nodded. He shook his head again, not in sorrow. Just fact. She put the gloves on. They fit perfectly. Then he signed. Thank you for coming. And again, you're always welcome. They didn't say goodbye. She climbed into the wagon and turned the horse toward the road. As she looked back once, just once, Elias was still on the porch, hands in his coat, watching, not with possession, but permission. By the time she returned to town, it was nearly dark. Emma was locking up the shop when Lydia tied off the horse and stepped down. She carried the gloves in her lap the whole ride back, but tucked them away before walking in. You're late, Emma said, but not harshly. Lydia chalk snow slowed me down. Emma eyed her, then nodded once. You'll make it up tomorrow. She turned to go, then stopped. He's different, she said, voice low. The man from the ranch. Lydia didn't reply. Emma shrugged. Just be sure whatever you're building doesn't blow over when the wind shifts. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep, not from restlessness, but from stillness. The kind that came after something important had shifted inside. She lay in bed, fingers moving unconsciously beneath the blanket, signing the alphabet again. Then her name. Then the sign Elias had given her, quiet, strong. She closed her eyes and didn't hear the sound, the one outside her window, the faint crunch of boot on snow, the creak of a fence rail, a shape, half-shadowed, standing too still across the road. It didn't move, didn't speak, but but it was there, watching, waiting. When his hands named her, she felt more known than any spoken word had ever made her feel. The saddle shop smelled of cured leather, sawdust, and something older, sweat, maybe, or time. Lydia stepped inside hesitantly, blinking in the dim light as her eyes adjusted from the sunlit street. She wasn't here on her own. Elias had led her, motioning with a small tilt of the head after they crossed the road from the dress shop. They'd met by chance, or maybe not, when he came to town for nails and a sack of oats. He'd asked if she had a moment to meet someone. Now they stood inside a space that felt carved out of the earth. Saddles lined the walls, all shapes and sizes, some so worn they looked ancient, others half finished and hanging by thick straps from beams overhead. At the back of the room, hunched over a workbench, was a man.
"Jonas!"
Elias signed as they approached. "This is Lydia." Jonas didn't look up right away. His hands moved with brutal precision, driving a stitching all through thick hide. He was broad through the shoulders, with one pant leg pinned up at the knee, the left leg. A cane leaned against the bench. When he finally glanced up, his eyes were sharp and unreadable beneath bushy gray brows. He grunted, then flatly, "She's the one who can't talk." Lydia stiffened. "Slate already halfway out of her satchel?" "She signs," Elias replied. Jonas snorted not unkindly. "So do trees in a storm." Still he nodded once in acknowledgement. Lydia wrote carefully on the slate, "Nice to meet you." Jonas squinted at it. "Handwriting's clean. You sew like that too?" Elias nodded before Lydia could respond. Jonas grumbled. "Figures, quiet ones always got good hands." Elias gestured toward a half-built saddle on the bench, then signed, "Show her." Jonas hesitated, then gave a low grunt and motioned her forward. "Schmear then." She stepped around the bench, careful not to brush against any tools. Jonas pointed to the stitching groove, where twin rows of holes were lined up like little wounds. "This ain't dressmaking," he said. "It's bones and sinew. No hiding mistakes under pleats." Lydia traced a finger lightly along the leather, thick, supple, real. He watched her the way a dog watches a stranger, not aggressive but ready to snap if she startled him. "Most folks don't last long in here," Jonas said. "The smell, the heat, the work, breaks 'em. You don't seem soft though. Not sure that's a compliment." She didn't smile, just nodded once. Then she chalked, "Were you always a saddle maker?" That gave him pause. He leaned back, resting heavily against the workbench. "No," he said. "Used to ride for the Territory Rangers before the leg." He tapped the wooden pin below his knee. "Ambush," he said simply. "Horse took one in the neck. I took a bullet to the bone. One of us didn't get back up." Lydia swallowed. Her fingers moved across the slate. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Jonas said. "Still got my hands. Still got my eyes. And I get to tell stubborn men like Elias when their horses are eating through their cinched straps." Elias rolled his eyes and signed something quick that made Jonas huff a dry laugh. Then the air shifted. Jonas leaned in slightly, gaze narrowing on Lydia. "You know this town's full of cowards, right?" he said. "Most of 'em hide it behind scripture or whiskey, but it's there, fear of what they don't understand." Lydia held his stare. Jonas nodded. "Good, then you'll understand when I say this. Elias may be quiet, but he ain't weak. That silence of his. Folks think it makes him soft." He pointed a thick finger at her. "Same as you?" She didn't flinch. Jonas leaned back again. "Just know, this place, it breaks what it doesn't understand. Don't let it break you too." The words sank into her like a slow setting weight. Elias moved beside her, a steadying presence. She wrote, "What do you do when it tries?" Jonas gave a wry smile. "You make sure it hears you anyway." Later, as they walked back through town, Elias signed, "He likes you." Lydia signed back, "That was him liking me?" Elias laughed, not loud, not audible, but his whole chest moved with it. He signed, "He trusts few. You're one now." They stopped near the edge of Main Street, where the snow was turning to slush in the afternoon sun. Children were throwing pebbles into puddles nearby. A boy dropped a rock and it splashed against Lydia's skirts. He paused, looked up sheepishly, then ran off when his friend called. Lydia bent, brushed off the hem. When she stood, Elias wasn't looking at her. He was staring past her, across the street, at Charles Morton. He stood just outside the general store, speaking to a rancher Lydia didn't recognize. Charles wore new boots, his coat pressed, his voice, though unheard, carried in posture. Confident, performative, he was gesturing, at Elias, at the shop, at Lydia. Elias's jaw tightened. He signed, "He's stirring something, I feel it." She nodded, chalking quickly. "What do we do?" His reply was slower this time. Wait, watch, prepare. But there was a tension in his shoulders she hadn't seen before. Not fear, something colder, more practiced. Later that evening, Elias walked her back to Martha's. Snow had started again, soft, gentle flakes that melted on her sleeves before they could settle. They paused at the porch. Elias signed, "Thank you for coming today." She signed, "Thank you for showing me that place, for Jonas." He hesitated, then signed slowly. "There's more to my past than the ranch. Jonas is part of it, so is the silence." She waited. But he didn't explain further, not yet. Just as she turned to go inside, Elias reached into his coat and handed her something small, a folded square of paper. She opened it after he'd gone. It was a drawing, quick but detailed. Her hands, mid-motion, threading a needle. Below it a single word in his handwriting, "Steady." She held it close, but something outside caught her attention. A flicker of movement at the edge of the alley. She turned sharply. No one. Just a loose shutter clapping in the wind. Still. The unease returned, that feeling from nights before. Not a memory. Not imagination. Presence. Something watching. She stepped inside quickly and bolted the door. Jonas's voice echoed in her memory. "This town breaks what it doesn't understand. Don't let it break you too." The storm rolled in just after midnight. Quiet at first, like a whisper slipping under the door. By morning, Willow Creek lay buried under a crust of snow so thick it deadened every sound. The world turned white, still and brittle. Lydia stood by the boarding house window, watching the wind drag fresh drifts across the street. Church bells rang in the distance, dull and slow. Sunday, a day meant for rest and prayer, and watching your neighbors out of the corner of your eye. She wasn't planning to go out, until she saw the rider, a man, hunched over in the saddle, fighting against the wind. The horse staggered, breath steaming from its nostrils. The rider pulled up in front of the sheriff's office, dismounted stiffly, and stumbled inside. Lydia stepped back from the window. Something about the way the horse looked, wet flank shaking, saddle askew, unsettled her. It wasn't a delivery, wasn't routine. She turned, grabbed her coat, and slipped out before Martha could stop her. The sheriff's office was dim and half-warm, fire dying low in the stove. Sheriff Claiborne stood near the back, arms crossed, face grim. The man from the storm leaned against a desk, coat dripping, fingers trembling. "North Ridge," he said. "2 of our cattle gone, gate busted, tracks in the snow." "Wolves?" the deputy asked, half hopeful. The man shook his head. "No, too clean." 2 horses followed, then turned south, one of them shoeless. Claiborne's jaw worked slowly. "You say south?" "Toward the flats, right past the Hartley girls' dress shop." Lydia felt a chill crawl beneath her skin, not from the snow, from the way both men turned to look at her. Claiborne's voice lowered. "You see anything yesterday? Anybody hanging around?" Lydia shook her head. "She don't speak, Sheriff," the deputy said. "Maybe she just didn't hear M. She sees plenty." Claiborne muttered. She reached into her satchel and wrote, "I saw Charles Morton watching the shop. And Elias." Claiborne's mouth twitched. "Morton's got no reason to rustle cattle," the deputy said. "His family owns land. Doesn't mean he's content with it," Claiborne replied. "And he's been bitter since that girl turned him into a joke." Lydia stiffened. She didn't turn away. "Still," Claiborne added, "I won't hang suspicion on a man without more than wind and hoofprints." She chalked, "Elias didn't do it." "I didn't say he did," the sheriff said evenly. "But his name's on a few folks' tongues now. That was enough." She turned and left before she could let them see her hands shake. The dress shop was empty when she arrived. Emma had lit the stove but hadn't opened the front door yet. She looked up from her ledger as Lydia entered, snow melting on her boots. "You heard?" Lydia nodded. Emma shut the book. "Someone's stirring trouble. Cattle theft means tensions. And around here, tension always lands on the newest face." She didn't have to say whose. Lydia stepped closer, signed slowly, "I want to go to Elias." Emma hesitated. "It's not safe, not with folks spooked and looking to blame someone." Lydia chalked. "That's exactly why I have to go." Emma met her eyes. For a long second, she didn't speak. Then she said, "I'll ready the horse." The ride out was brutal. Wind peeled across the ridge, and the trail all but vanished in the drifts. The horse spooked once, slipping on a patch of black ice. Lydia steadied him with soft sounds and firmer reins. When the ranch came into view, the relief almost stole her breath. Smoke from the chimney, a thin line, a sign of life. She dismounted stiffly and made her way to the porch, knocked twice. Then again, no answer. She circled around the house. The barn door stood half open, creaking against its hinges. She pushed it wider. Elias stood inside, one hand on a colt's halter, the other on a lead rope. His coat was unbuttoned, snow in his hair. He looked up, startled. Then his expression shifted. Tension melting into something softer. "You came," he signed. She nodded, then signed back. "The sheriff suspects you." His face didn't change. "Not right away." "Then because I'm deaf." She hesitated. "Then because you're alone, and Charles is loud." That got a reaction. His jaw set. His fingers moved sharply. "I didn't touch those cattle. Jonas will vouch for me. I was at the shop until sunset, then home. I didn't leave." She reached for her slate. "That won't stop them." "We have to do something." Elias moved toward the barn door, looked out across the snow, then he turned, signed, "Come with me." He led her past the shed and toward the hill behind the barn. Snow came to her shins now. Her skirt dragged, soaked. Her breath burned in her lungs. At the crest of the hill, Elias pointed. Below, near the tree line, were hoofprints, 2 horses, one barefoot. "They led them through here." Elias signed. "Not me." Lydia looked again. The tracks curved wide of the house. No approach. He pointed again, deeper into the woods, toward Dry Creek. "Smugglers used to run cattle there. Hide them until the storm passed." She nodded. "Then will you take this to Claiborne?" Elias hesitated, then signed. "He won't listen to me." She wrote, "He will if I go with you." A long silence followed. "Then they'll try to make you choose sides?" She looked up, eyes fierce. "I already have." They arrived in town just after dusk. The sheriff's office was half lit. Men crowded inside, talking low. Jonas was there too, leaning on his cane, scowling at every word Charles spoke. When the door opened and Elias stepped in, the room fell quiet. Charles turned. "Well," he said, voice oily, "look what the snow dragged in." Lydia stepped forward. Slate in hand, she wrote, slowly, deliberately. Elias found tracks, 2 riders, not him, no return path to his land. Claiborne took the slate, read it, then looked at Elias. "Where?" Elias pointed to the hill, signed a Dry Creek. "Covered path." Jonas stepped forward, voice low. "That's a known route, used back in the war. If someone's moving cattle, that's the spot." Charles scoffed. "You're taking the word of a cripple and a mute." Claiborne's eyes narrowed. "I'm taking the word of a rancher who's never stolen a damn thing, and a woman who's done more for this town in silence than you have with a full tongue." Charles's face darkened. Jonas chuckled. "Oda, watch your step, Morton. Snow makes it hard to tell where the ground ends." Charles left in a flurry of stomping boots and pride. Lydia let out a slow breath. Claiborne nodded at her. "You did right coming in." But her heart still raced, because the look Charles had given her before he walked out. It wasn't finished. It was a warning. And something else? Something like a promise. When she and Elias stepped outside, the cold hit like a slap. But she felt warmer than she had in days, until she saw the mark on the boarding house door, a crude symbol, drawn in charcoal, fresh. Martha scrubbed at the door like she could erase the threat with soap and vinegar. But the mark, crude, violent, still smudged from the charcoal, had sunk deeper than the wood. Lydia stood behind her, clutching her shawl tighter. The street was quiet, too quiet. No children, no wagons. Just the wind dragging dust across the hard, packed road and the eyes of neighbors behind curtained windows. "You recognize it?" Martha asked without turning around. Lydia nodded slowly. She chalked yes. Quaker families used to mark stolen property with it, only in reverse, a warning. Martha leaned her weight into the cloth, her voice low. "Except now it's not a warning, it's a message." Lydia raised her slate and wrote, "From Charles." "Of course it's from Charles." Martha snapped. Same arrogance, same venom, but worse now. "This is public." She tossed the rag aside and stood, breath short, eyes burning. "He wants you to feel watched," she said. "Wants everyone to know you're marked. That siding with Elias puts you on his list." Lydia looked down at her hands. They were still. Too still. Martha studied her. "You can stay in today. If you want, I'll tell Emma you're ill." Lydia picked up the slate again. "No, I need to be seen, not hidden." Martha's hard expression flickered. Something like pride hiding behind worry. "Then you keep your shoulders straight," she said. "You walk like you belong here, because you do." The shop was cold when Lydia arrived. Emma was already behind the counter, steam curling from a chipped mug. She didn't ask questions when Lydia walked in, just handed her a roll of cloth and said, "We finish the wedding dress by Friday. The Wallace girl's not waiting on your bruised feelings." Lydia got to work. Her fingers moved on habit, measure, cut, faced, but her mind wandered. She kept replaying the image of that symbol on the door, the way it bled into the grain, as if it had always been there. At noon, the shop bell jingled. She looked up, half expecting Charles, but it wasn't him. It was the girl, 12, maybe 13, pale, sharp-eyed. She wore a patched coat and muddy boots, and she moved like someone used to dodging elbows. "I need mending," the girl said, laying a bundle on the counter. Emma gave her a look. "Your mother send you?" The girl didn't blink. "No, mother. Just need the stitches." Lydia stepped closer, untied the bundle. A shirt, a man's, torn clean across the back. Emma frowned. "Where'd you get this?" The girl hesitated, then looked straight at Lydia. "There's a barn, outside town, South Ridge. 3 horses there that ain't been claimed, one of 'em still got a brand from the Pritchard ranch." Lydia's heart stopped. Emma crossed her arms. "You telling us someone stashed stolen horses outside town?" The girl shrugged. "I didn't say that." Lydia grabbed her slate. "Why tell us?" The girl tilted her head. "Because you're the only ones listening, and because the man who left that shirt behind, he talks too loud and hits too fast." Emma looked at Lydia. "She means Charles." Lydia wrote quickly, "Take us there." The girl's name was June. She led them behind the bakery, through the alley, and out the south gate. The wind had picked up again, biting and sharp. Lydia kept her scarf high and her steps quick. They reached the ridge just before sunset. The barn was small, half collapsed at the rear, tucked behind a grove of fir trees. The roof sagged but held. Inside, the air was thick with manure and sweat. 3 horses stood tethered in a far stall, nervous, shifting, ears twitching, and there, hanging on a nail, was another shirt, this one stained with blood at the collar. June pointed. "That one belongs to the man who gave me 2 coins to keep quiet." Emma stepped back, cursing under her breath. Lydia stepped forward. On the flank of one of the horses, beneath the dust and sweat, was a faint brand, P, then an R curling into a crescent. Pritchard. Lydia chalked fast. "We have proof. We go now." "Sheriff." June grabbed her arm. "You think the sheriff doesn't know already?" Emma narrowed her eyes. "What are you saying?" June looked between them, and for the first time her bravado cracked. "He's been looking the other way for weeks. Morton pays the taxes, buys the whiskey, gives the appearance of order." Emma cursed again. Lydia felt her stomach drop. They couldn't go to Claiborne, not yet. She turned to Emma and scribbled, "We need someone who won't sell silence." "Jonas." Emma nodded. "He'll know what to do." They left the barn and climbed back to the ridge. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the cold settled fast, like water freezing in her lungs. Halfway back to town, June stopped. "Someone's following." Emma spun. "You sure?" The girl pointed to the hill. "He's not close, but he's there." Lydia turned slowly. There, a shadow, too still to be wind, too tall to be a tree. Charles, or someone he'd sent. She didn't wait. They ran. Jonas opened the door before they knocked. His face was all hard angles and suspicion. Lydia held up her slate. "We have proof. Stolen horses. South Ridge barn." "Charles." Jonas let them in, lit another lamp, locked the door. Emma told him everything. June filled in the rest. When they were done, Jonas stood silent, breathing slow, his cane planted like a flag in the floorboards. "Finally," he said, "Claiborne's not corrupt, but he's weak, same as most." He looked at Lydia. "You got a choice. Hand this to the law and pray it doesn't vanish, or we show the town another way." Lydia's hand trembled as she chalked. "What other way?" Jonas gave a dry smile. "Truth, in the open. At the church gathering. Tomorrow night." Emma shook her head. "You want to expose him in front of half the county?" Jonas nodded. "You bring evidence." "Bring the girl. I'll bring Elias. We speak the truth where everyone has to hear it." Lydia didn't answer right away. Then she reached for the drawing Elias had given her. The one of her hands, labeled steady. She looked up. Then she wrote, "We do it together." Jonas gave a satisfied grunt. "Then get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's when the fire starts." But as Lydia stepped out into the night, June close behind her, she felt a flicker of unease. Because some men don't wait for fire, they light it first. "You think the sheriff doesn't know already?" The morning of the church gathering broke too quiet. No birds, no boots on the boardwalks, just the slow grind of wagon wheels and a town holding its breath. Lydia stepped into the shop just after sunrise. Emma was already there, her sleeves rolled, her eyes sharper than usual. She held out a bundle, a plain dress in deep gray. "Wear this?" she said. "Simple, strong. Says you came to speak, not to sway." Lydia took it with a nod. Upstairs she dressed with slow hands. The fabric smelled faintly of wood smoke and starch. She tied her hair back tight, pinned the slate to her hip. When she stepped back into the room, Emma looked at her and said, simply, "Good." Outside, the sky hung low and thick with clouds. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the air felt heavy with it. They met Jonas at the saddle shop. He had Elias with him. The two men stood like stone, flanked by June, who wore a boy's coat too big for her shoulders and a stare too old for her face. Jonas looked them over. "You sure?" Lydia signed yes. He nodded once. "Then we walk in together. You speak, I back you. Let them hear the truth before someone else rewrites it." They walked the path in silence. The church sat on the north end of town, its whitewashed boards gray with age. Folks were already gathering, families in coats, ranchers with weather-beaten faces, merchants with suspicion in their eyes. Charles stood on the steps, smiling and shaking hands like a preacher before a sermon. When he saw Lydia, his expression didn't change, but his posture did, subtle, tightened. Jonas pushed open the church doors inside. The benches were filling fast. Sheriff Claiborne stood at the back, arms folded. Pastor Bell waited near the altar, uncertain. Jonas stepped forward. "We need a minute." Bell looked between them. 5 minutes. Lydia stepped up onto the small platform, her slate in hand. The crowd shifted. Murmurs rose. She chalked fast, then turned the slate outward. 3 horses, South Ridge, 1 branded, 1 bloody shirt, hidden under Charles Morton's orders. A ripple moved through the room. She wrote more. A girl paid to stay quiet. A sheriff told too late. A rancher blamed with no proof. Someone in the back stood. "You expect us to believe a mute girl over a man we've known all our lives?" Lydia didn't flinch. She stepped down, handed the slate to Claiborne, then opened the pouch Elias carried. Out came the brand sketch, the bloody shirt, a note, in Charles's handwriting promising, "Quiet for coin." Gasps. And then, Charles's voice, cutting through it all. "This is a trick," he said. "She's in love with that man. She'd say anything to protect him." Jonas stepped forward, cane tapping. "And you'd say anything to bury the truth." The room turned. Some eyes narrowed, others dropped. Then June spoke. "I saw him," she said. "Gave me 2 silver pieces and told me to forget, but I don't forget." Claiborne looked at Charles. "Is it your handwriting?" Charles laughed once. "Even if it is, it proves nothing." The sheriff took the shirt. "Then you won't mind if we ride out and check the barn." Charles's smile vanished. In the silence that followed, Lydia felt the tide shift just slightly, just enough. Then came the sound. A shatter of glass at the back of the church, a hiss, smoke. Someone screamed, "Fire!" Chaos broke like a dam. People pushed toward the door. Children cried. Smoke bloomed from a broken lantern on the floor. Lydia grabbed June and pulled her low. Jonas barked for calm. Elias shoved open a side door, ushering people out, and in the confusion Charles was gone. When the fire was out and the church aired, Lydia stood in the ash-dusted pews and stared at the shattered window. Claiborne walked up, coughing. "He lit it. No doubt now." Lydia wrote, "And now he's running." Claiborne nodded. "I'll send a deputy, but we both know he's got a head start." She turned to Elias, signed. "He'll go after the ranch or you." Elias met her eyes. "Let him come." But Lydia wasn't thinking about the ranch. She was thinking about the people in the church, about the fact that, even now, even with proof, it had taken smoke and threat to make them listen. She felt the weight of it settle deep in her chest, not fear, resolve. Because silence hadn't saved her, but today it spoke loud enough to burn. Even if it proves nothing. The flames had barely cooled in the church before the cold set back in, harder this time, biting, bitter, like the fire had awakened something in the wind. Lydia sat on the edge of her bed, boots still laced, shawl wrapped tight. Sleep wouldn't come. Not with Charles out there, not after he'd disappeared into smoke and shadows like the coward he was. She kept seeing the way he vanished. No confrontation, no words, just fire and flight. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find Martha, pale but composed. "Elias is at the edge of town," she said. "Saddle ready. Jonas too. Says they're heading out. Now." Lydia didn't ask where. She already knew. The trail south of Willow Creek turned narrow and twisted as it carved through Black Hollow Pass. Snow drifted high against the rock face, narrowing the path to a horse's width. It was country few ventured into unless they had something to hide, or someone to hunt. Elias rode ahead, jaw set. Jonas followed, his old rifle strapped across his back, his face unreadable in the cold. Lydia brought up the rear, bundled in a borrowed coat, slate tucked in her satchel, hand steady on the reins. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The signs were clear, hoofprints in the half-frozen mud, a scrap of cloth snagged on a branch. Morton had gone this way. Jonas finally broke the silence. We'll reach the fork by dusk. If he's smart, he'll hole up in that old line shack near Iron Bluff. If he's desperate, he'll make for the canyon. Elias signed without looking back. He's desperate. Lydia nodded to herself. Desperate men didn't think clearly, but they were dangerous for the same reason. They made camp that night under a canopy of pines, snow tamped down with their boots, a small fire barely more than a flicker. Lydia chewed jerky without tasting it. Her muscles ached, but her mind stayed sharp. She took out her slate and wrote, if he runs to the canyon, what happens then? Jonas took a long drag from his pipe and exhaled through his nose. Depends on who gets there first. She erased the slate, chalked again. Would you kill him? Jonas looked at her, not surprised, just tired. If it came to that, maybe, but I'd rather he be dragged back. Let the town see what he is in daylight. Elias signed. He wants me to follow. This is bait. Jonas nodded. Probably. But the thing about bait, sometimes it catches more than one kind of animal. Lydia turned toward the fire, eyes heavy, and yet she didn't sleep, not really. She saw the mark on the boarding house door, the flicker of firelight in the church, Charles's face in the crowd, smirking while the truth burned. He hadn't run to escape. He was running to finish what he started. By midday, they reached the split, the shack to the west, the canyon to the east. No fresh tracks, no obvious trail. Elias dismounted and crouched low. Snow was packed, but not undisturbed. He brushed it aside slowly, patiently, then pointed. A print, light, barely there, but enough, toward the canyon. Jonas cursed under his breath. Damn fools making a last stand. They followed. The canyon opened like a wound in the land, jagged stone sheer drops, and echoes that made whispers sound like shouts. Snow hadn't settled here. Wind swept it clean. They left the horses tied at the ridge and descended on foot. Lydia's boots slipped more than once. Elias reached back to steady her. She squeezed his wrist in silent thanks. They found the campfire first, dead coals, a blackened pot. Still warm, then they heard the voice. You came. Charles stepped out from behind a rock outcrop, revolver in hand. His coat was torn. One side of his face bruised and scabbed from a fall, but his eyes burned. He looked at Elias. I waited. Figured you'd bring your mute little shadow too. Lydia didn't move. Elias stepped forward, hands at his sides, calm. Charles laughed bitterly. Still playing the saint. Still hiding behind gestures and pity. Jonas raised his rifle slightly. Drop it, Morton. Charles glanced at him. You gonna shoot me, old man, before I say my piece? Lydia stepped beside Elias, wrote on the slate, held it high. You ran because you knew. Charles's face twisted. I ran because you were turning this town against its own, with lies, with sympathy for people who don't belong. Elias took a step. Signed it. You branded me before you knew my name. Charles barked a laugh. You think names matter. You think truth matters. He raised the revolver. Lydia's breath caught. Jonas fired first. The shot rang through the canyon like thunder. Charles jerked, dropped the revolver, staggered back, but didn't fall. The bullet had caught his shoulder, spinning him sideways. Elias was there in seconds, tackling him before he could reach for the weapon again. They struggled in the snow, fists and limbs flailing. Lydia ran forward, eyes wide. Charles rolled, grabbed a rock, slammed it toward Elias's temple. Lydia screamed. No sound, just breath. But it didn't matter. Jonas fired again. This time, Charles fell, not dead, breathing, bleeding, but done. Lydia dropped to her knees beside Elias, checking his head. Blood, but shallow. He looked at her, blinking, signed slowly. I'm fine. She exhaled. They stood together. Jonas limped over and looked down at Charles. You'll ride back hogtied, he said. Let the town see you like this. Charles coughed, sneered. They'll forget. They always do. Lydia stared at him, then took her slate. Wrote one line. Not this time. She tucked it into his coat. For the ride back. For the reckoning still to come. You think truth matters. They rode back at dawn. Charles tied to the saddle like a sack of spoiled grain, groaning with every jolt. Jonas led, rifle across his lap. Elias followed, bruised and silent. Lydia rode last, watching the trail for shadows, half expecting the man to chew through his own hate and run again. But he didn't. By the time they reached Willow Creek, the sun had scraped the sky raw with pinks and oranges. The wind carried smoke from breakfast fires and the faint creak of shutters being opened. The town hadn't woken up to justice in years. Now it watched it arrive on horseback. Sheriff Claiborne stood on the steps of his office, eyes narrowing as they approached. Behind him, the deputy leaned against the rail, chewing straw, gaze fixed on the man tied to the horse. "Jesus," the deputy muttered. "He really did it?" Jonah swung down, knees stiff. "You gonna take him, or are you waiting for him to apologize first?" Claiborne stepped forward, jaw clenched. "Put him in the back, no visitors. I'll wire the circuit judge." Lydia dismounted silently. Elias followed her as they watched the sheriff's men drag Charles off the horse, his coat stiff with dried blood. Eyes still burning with something unrepentant, he didn't shout, didn't plead. He just stared at Lydia. "You think they'll keep believing you?" he rasped. "This town forgets, and you ain't one of them?" Lydia didn't flinch. She chalked a message and held it up. "You forgot who was watching." Claiborne slammed the cell door shut. By afternoon, the town changed, not loudly, not with flags or parades, but in the small ways that mattered. The dress shop had customers again. Emma laughed once, short and sharp, when a man asked if Lydia was still working. Jonas sat outside the saddle shop, carving notches into wood, a quiet rhythm to say he was still here, still watching. And Elias rebuilt the fence outside his ranch, post by post. Alone but no longer invisible that evening, Lydia walked there not with a slate full of words, not with a message to deliver, just with the ache of survival humming in her chest. Elias was in the barn, brushing down a mare. He turned when she stepped inside, expression unreadable. She signed, "You're not bleeding anymore." He smiled faintly. "I heal fast." She approached slowly, took his hand, turned it over, calluses, scars, and ink smudges on one thumb from the sketches he still did late at night. She touched her fingers to her lips, then to his palm. His breath caught, just slightly. Then he signed, "You're not just the girl who doesn't speak anymore." She nodded. Signed back, "And you're not the man they feared." They stood in silence, not the empty kind, the full kind. The kind that knew what it cost to get there. Then Elias turned and walked to the workbench. He picked up a small box, opened it, and handed her a folded paper. It was another sketch, of her hands, one holding chalk. The other held out, not in defense but offering beneath it in block letters, "Truth doesn't need a voice, just someone brave enough to carry it." Her throat tightened. She touched the drawing with reverence, then looked up. "Seen, do you think we're done?" He shook his head. "People don't forget that fast." She nodded. The wind howled outside. Winter wasn't done with them yet. Neither was the town. But for now, there was this barn, these quiet hands, and a moment that hadn't existed yesterday. They sat down on the hay bale together, close but not touching. Because healing wasn't loud either. It was slow, patient, earned. "You're not just the girl who doesn't speak anymore." Spring came slow to Willow Creek, not in green bursts or wild blossoms, but in a steady loosening of frost, in the creak of thawed hinges, and the way people finally started speaking in full sentences again. Snow still clung to the shadows, but the silence between folks had begun to melt. It had been 2 months since Charles Morton was locked away, and for 2 months, Lydia had waited, every morning. She walked to the boarding house window and looked down the street toward the telegraph office, and every morning it was the same. No message, no judge, just the slow grind of a town pretending things had gone back to normal, except they hadn't. Emma noticed it first. The drop in foot traffic, the murmurs behind customers' backs, some orders canceled, some just never picked up, not openly hostile, but thin-lipped, careful. "Truth burns slow here," Emma said one day, folding a half-finished bodice. "They believed you, enough to clap, enough to nod, but not enough to stay brave." Lydia didn't argue, she just wrote. "What are they waiting for?" Emma shook her head. "For someone else to say it again louder, or for you to vanish so they don't have to remember." That night, Lydia walked to the sheriff's office. Claiborne was at his desk, looking older than she remembered, a ledger open in front of him. He looked up, eyes tired. "He's still here." "Wrote any word," he sighed. "Circuit judge is delayed again. Spring flood washed out the line west. Could be weeks." "And the town," she chalked. He hesitated. "Some are grateful, quietly. Others say you brought trouble, that you stirred things up that were better left settled." Lydia stared at him. "You didn't lie," Claiborne said quickly. "But truth don't always mean peace, you understand." She wrote one more thing, "Justice isn't peace," and then she left. The next morning, a rock smashed through the front window of the dress shop. Emma screamed. Lydia rushed from the back room, heart thudding, glass scattered across the floor, glittering like ice. The note tied to the stone read, "Go home." No name, no signature, Just 2 words and the cold truth behind them. Jonas came as soon as he heard. He stood in the doorway, looking down at the message. "Cowards," he muttered. Lydia chalked. "They're getting bolder," he nodded. "That's how it goes. When fear doesn't work, they try warning shots. Next comes something worse." Emma was already boarding the window. "Let them come. I've got more nails than they've got courage." But Lydia's hands trembled, not from fear of pain, but from what silence had started whispering again in the streets, that she didn't belong, that she'd brought something dangerous by daring to speak at all. That evening, she returned to Elias's ranch. He was splitting wood behind the barn, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow despite the lingering chill. She signed the shop was hit a rock through the glass, his jaw clenched. He set the axe down slowly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. Then the town's turning quiet again, not the good kind. He wiped his hands, watching her closely, then signed "Leave with me." She blinked. "You and me. Leave town? Start somewhere new," he continued. "No more waiting, no more watching shadows." She looked past him toward the hills. It was tempting, sweet, safe, but she wrote, "That's what Charles wanted, for me to vanish." Elias signed, "This place doesn't deserve you." She stepped closer. "It's not about deserving. It's about what's right." He watched her, the wind catching the ends of her hair. Then, softly, "You're braver than me." She shook her head. "No, I'm just tired of being afraid." 2 nights later, the barn behind the boarding house burned. Flames climbed fast, licking the sky. Lydia woke to shouts and smoke curling through the open window. She ran outside barefoot. Heart-pounding neighbors formed a bucket line, passing water in desperate rhythm. But it was too late. The roof collapsed with a groan and a crack, sparks flying like fireflies. By dawn, all that remained were blackened beams and the smell of ash. The fire hadn't spread to the house, but the message was clear. No note this time. They didn't need one. Sheriff Claiborne came to inspect the damage. He crouched near the barn's foundation, poking through the wreckage. "Lantern was knocked over," he said. "Kerosene soaked the hay first." Lydia wrote, "You know it wasn't an accident." He didn't deny it. "No witnesses, no tracks. And unless someone talks, I got nothing that'll stick." She stared at him. Wrote, "If they hurt someone next, will that stick?" Claiborne didn't answer. That night, Lydia returned to the church. Empty pews, cold air, the scent of old smoke still faint beneath the floorboards. She lit a lamp, took her seat at the front, and waited. She didn't leave a note, didn't call anyone. She just sat there, visible, unafraid. And by morning, she wasn't alone. Emma came first, then Jonas, then the widow from the dry goods store, 2 ranch hands and a boy who'd never looked her in the eye before. By noon, 10 people filled the pews. No speeches, no signs, just presence. Elias arrived last. He didn't sit. He stood beside her, and for the first time in weeks, Lydia felt something shift, not the town, but the silence inside it. Truth don't always mean peace. Lydia never expected the town to come to her, but it did. One quiet morning at the church, with sunlight warming the floorboards and dust catching in the light like gold, she was seated where she always sat, chalk resting in her hand, slate clean and waiting, Elias beside her, Jonas leaning against the back wall, Emma stitching in silence 2 rows behind, and then came Ruth Wallace, the mayor's wife, all pressed linen and polished shoes. She entered without ceremony, walked straight up the aisle, and stood in front of Lydia. "I want you to speak." Lydia blinked, uncertain. Ruth cleared her throat. "At the hearing. For Morton. Word came this morning. The judge's rider is 2 days out. It'll be public." Emma looked up. "You mean testify?" Ruth nodded. "Not just to the court, to the people. They need to hear it again. This time from her. No slate, no chalk." Lydia felt her stomach twist. She raised her hands to sign, but Ruth stepped forward. "I know you can't speak. That's not what I mean. I want you to be seen, heard, in the way only you can be. No one forgets the girl who stood silent in the fire." Silence followed. Jonas finally broke it. "You think that'll change anything?" Ruth didn't look away. "It already is." She placed a folded piece of paper on the pew in front of Lydia. "Call it invitation, call it request. Either way, we need you." And then she turned and walked out. No fanfare, no grand speech, just a woman who decided something and left others to catch up. Lydia stared at the paper. It was handwritten, neat, careful cursive. A list of names who'd signed in support, 10 to start. She recognized some: the widow from the store, the school teacher, one of the ranch hands who helped pass buckets the night the barn burned. Not a crowd, but not alone. She wrote on the slate and turned it to Elias. "Should I?" He didn't answer right away. Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out another drawing. This one wasn't of her hands. It was of the church. Its windows, its cracked white paint, the steps where she'd stood with smoke still in her hair. Beneath it, he'd written, "If not you, then who?" She exhaled. Nodded once. They prepared the next day. Emma helped her choose a dress, not new, not ornate. A simple navy with a stiff collar and clean lines. "Shows backbone." Emma muttered, "Not fuss." Jonas practiced with her. Short questions written out, phrases she could answer with signs or a slate, clear enough for the judge and crowd to follow. Elias said little, but he was always nearby, mending the fence, bringing her tea, keeping the space steady around her. On the morning of the hearing, Lydia dressed slowly. Her hands trembled once while buttoning the collar. She paused, took one deep breath, then finished. Outside, the street buzzed. The judge had arrived by horseback just after dawn. Court was to be held in the old assembly hall, biggest building in town next to the church. Folks filed in early, half out of curiosity, half out of duty. Claiborne stood at the doors, checking names. Jonas gave him a look as they passed. Elias flanked Lydia's right, Emma her left. Inside, the room was packed. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of bodies and tension. Charles sat at the front, shackled, guarded by 2 deputies. His face was thinner, jaw darker with unshaved stubble, but his eyes, still sharp, still dangerous. The judge was an older man with white hair and the kind of voice that didn't need to shout. He read the charges slowly, deliberately: theft, arson, threats of violence, intent to incite. Then came witnesses. Emma went first, firm and unshaken. Jonas next, voice gravel, steady. Then June. The girl stood straight, hands in fists, her words clipped but clear. She pointed at Charles. "That's the man who paid me to keep quiet. I ain't quiet no more." And finally, the judge called Lydia. She stood, walked to the front. The room hushed. The scrape of her boots on wood sounded loud in the silence. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Hartwell, you may answer by slate or sign. Do you understand why you are here?" She nodded. "Wrote on the slate to speak." "Very well. Do you affirm that what you've presented, the note, the evidence, the statements, is true to the best of your memory?" She held up the slate. "Yes." The judge looked at Charles. "Do you deny paying the child, hiding the animals, setting the fire?" Charles smirked. "I deny giving them what they wanted, that's all." Lydia turned, faced the crowd, and for the first time, she didn't write anything. She just raised her hands slow, measured, and signed. "He tried to burn silence into me, but silence burns back." Whispers rippled through the room. Some recognized the gestures, others just felt them. She stepped forward, signed again. He thought no voice meant no truth. He was wrong. Then, slowly, deliberately, she pulled a fresh piece of slate from her satchel and wrote one word: Enoch, held it high. The judge nodded once. The rest was procedure. The verdict would take days, the sentencing longer, but something had already broken loose in that room. Not applause, not cheers, just air, clean cleared. Outside, the wind picked up. Elias took her hand. Jonas exhaled like he'd been holding it for months. "And Emma?" She smiled. For real this time. Lydia didn't smile. She just closed her eyes and let the weight of it settle. Because truth didn't end a fight, it just meant it started in the open. He thought no voice meant no truth. He was wrong. The verdict came 5 days later. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words landed like hammers. Guilty on all counts. Charles didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stared straight ahead, jaw locked like he'd swallowed iron. Sentencing would follow in the spring circuit. He'd be transported south, under escort, by the end of the month. Until then, he'd remain in the Willow Creek cell. Lydia sat in the second row, slate in her lap, hands still. She didn't smile, didn't cry. She only looked at Charles as the guards lifted him up and began leading him out. As he passed, he glanced her way and spoke softly just for her. "You think this is over?" She met his eyes. No slate, no signs, just silence, and he looked away first. In the days that followed, the town shifted again, less afraid, less angry, but not exactly warm. Some spoke to her by name now, others nodded in the street. Most still looked away, and that was fine. Lydia never asked for applause. She only wanted the fire to stay out. Elias spent more time in town now, helping fix the window at the dress shop, sitting outside the church with June, teaching her how to draw a horse in 3 strokes. Jonas repaired the front steps of the saddle shop and painted the doorframe for the first time in 6 years. He hummed while he worked, low and steady. Emma baked bread that didn't burn. Spring crept in, slow but certain. The first green buds clung stubbornly to tree limbs, and mud replaced snow on the edge of every road. And still, Lydia waited, not for fear, but for clarity. She sat at the edge of Elias's porch one evening, watching the sky turn the color of bruised peaches. He handed her a tin mug. Hot coffee with too much sugar. She signed. You ever think about leaving? He nodded. Sometimes. But then I think, where would I go that wouldn't ask me to hide? She nodded slowly. Then would you still leave if I asked you to? Elias hesitated. Then signed. Only if you were running toward something, not away. She smiled, faint but true. What about staying? Same rule, he signed. You stay if it builds something. Not just because it's easier than moving. Lydia looked out over the land. The wind stirred the grass, soft and gold in the fading light. I was born with a voice, she signed slowly. But I didn't know how to use it until I had something worth saying. Elias watched her. She reached into her satchel, pulled out the latest slate. On it, she'd written a question, what does a second chance cost? And beneath it, her own answer, only everything that held you back the first time. Later that week, Martha returned from the rail station with a letter, addressed to Lydia. The envelope bore the seal of the judge. It wasn't a summons, or a warning. It was an offer. The judge was retiring at year's end. He had no children, no heirs. But he did have a network of people who believed the justice system needed more than strong voices. It needed ones who knew the cost of silence. He was recommending Lydia for a new role, advisor and advocate for the voiceless, a liaison to towns along the rail, a traveler, a teacher, a writer, not a deputy. Something harder, something lonelier, something truer. She read it twice, then set it on the table. Emma watched from the doorway. You'll go, she said. Lydia nodded. You scared? She wrote, not of the road. Emma gave a crooked smile. Good, 'cause the road's gonna need you more than this place does. The next day she told Elias. They sat by the fence he'd rebuilt. The posts were straight now, the nails clean. It wouldn't fall again. She handed him the letter. He read it slowly, then handed it back. When? He asked. Summer, she signed. They'll send for me after the thaw. Elias looked out at the horizon, then signed. So we have a season, she nodded. He took her hand, held it like it might drift. Then let's not waste it. That night, they ate together under a sky wide enough to carry every regret they hadn't spoken yet. Neither of them said forever, because some goodbyes aren't sharp, some are soft, some are made of time. Only everything that held you back the first time. The summer came with thunder. Rain swept across the plains in long, heavy sheets. Roads turned to rivers. Trees bent beneath wind that sounded like distant trains. The town quieted under the weight of the sky, and in that hush, Lydia packed her satchel. She folded 2 dresses, her slate, a bundle of chalk, Elias's drawing of her hands, and the letter from the judge, creased now from how often she'd held it. She didn't bring much else. She wasn't leaving to forget. She was leaving to remember. Emma walked her to the edge of town. They didn't hug, just stood in the rain, boots soaking, letting the goodbye stretch long and wordless. You write when you can, Emma said. Even if it's just a mark, Lydia nodded. And don't let them call you miss anything. Make them learn your name. Lydia smiled, reached out, squeezed her hand, then walked. Jonas met her near the rail crossing. He handed her a tin box, matches, thread, coffee, and a bullet, just in case. She raised an eyebrow. Not for trouble, he said. For memory. You keep it to remember what you survived. She opened the lid. Inside a single .22 cartridge gleamed against soft cloth. She wrote on the slate, You ever need me, Jonas grunted. I'll send a horse. Then he tipped his hat and turned back down the trail. Elias waited by the station. He didn't speak, just held her satchel while she brushed the rain from her hair. Then he signed. I tried to think of what to say. She signed back. I'd rather remember what we didn't. He nodded, pressed something into her hand, a worn coin, smooth on one side, carved on the other, her name etched by pocketknife, a talisman. For when you forget who you are, he signed. She tucked it into her coat. The train came slow and loud, a beast of smoke and thunder. She stepped onto the platform, turned one last time. Elias stood in the rain, not waving, just there, and that was enough. She boarded, took a seat near the window. The train pulled forward, and Willow Creek became smaller, then gone. She stopped first in towns with no names, hamlets with 2 streets and a post office, places where girls still walked with their heads down and boys learned silence before kindness. She didn't preach, didn't push. She listened. She taught signs to schoolchildren, left chalk behind in every station house, sat with women on porches, and drew their fears in pictures so they could name them. She wrote letters to judges, testimonies for strangers, pages of memory that had never been spoken aloud. Sometimes she was met with kindness, sometimes with suspicion. But she never hid, and in every place she stayed, even just a week, she left one thing carved somewhere small: silence is not absence, it is not weakness, it is not shame. And under that it is the space truth grows in. Years passed. She returned once to Willow Creek. The church had been painted. The dress shop now had a second room. Jonas had retired. Emma had a silver streak in her braid. Elias had built a porch swing. They sat on it for hours. He showed her a letter from June, now teaching at a school 2 towns over. She signs better than me, he said with a grin. Lydia smiled. They didn't talk about leaving again. They didn't need to. She left the next morning before sunrise, slipped a sketch under Elias's coffee cup, a drawing of the swing, 2 mugs, 1 sky, no words, only lines, only memory. Her story was never printed in books, but it was told on trains, in backrooms, in whispers from women who'd never dared speak, and in firm nods from men who'd once looked away, not as legend, not as martyr, but as proof that the quiet ones remember, that truth doesn't need a shout to be heard, and that healing, like justice, begins in the hush. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that refuses to vanish.